You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hey, welcome back to Feed Your Wild. I am your host, Vanessa Rodriguez, your intuitive nourishment guide today and every episode. We have an interesting one today. I wanted to get a little vulnerable and transparent. So I have been talking about this workshop that I'm leading, this live workshop coming up this Thursday, March 16th. It's called The Free to Be All of Me, a practitioner's guide to overcoming imposter syndrome and reclaiming your intuitive gifts. Now, this is a 3-hour immersive workshop, and it's for aspiring and advanced practitioners and healing artists who are ready to break through what we might call imposter syndrome. Now, since I have been putting this out there and sharing about this workshop, I've received a ton of questions and feedback and people wanting to dive into this topic, the nuance of this topic a little bit more. And so I wanted to create an episode where I am sharing not only my perspective, but also my own experience within this theme of imposter syndrome. And the interesting thing is I'm not a huge fan of this term imposter syndrome. And I'm going to be talking about that more inside the workshop. There's a reason for that. But I also received a lot of feedback from others that, this term didn't fully align with them. They felt like there was a lot in it. And yes, of course, there is so much nuance within this, what we could call this phenomenon. Now, this term imposter syndrome came later. The original name for what we are talking about here was imposter phenomenon. And this was coined by two psychologists, Dr. Clance and Imes, in the late 1970s after spending years counseling highly accomplished people. So professors, administrators, students who were extremely concerned with being exposed as a fraud. And so very interestingly, they saw this pattern come up time and time again. They named it imposter phenomenon. And through the zeitgeist, as it spread through, it was pathologized, and this term imposter syndrome came through. So I have a little bit of challenge with this term imposter syndrome because I don't necessarily like to utilize things that pathologize, right? When it really is such a deeper issue here that even beyond psychology, there's so much at play, which I'm going to scratch the surface on today as it relates to my own personal experience with it. But for the sake of, we could say, recognition, awareness, this term imposter syndrome is useful because people immediately recognize and understand it. So that is my higher purpose behind utilizing this term imposter syndrome, is really for recognition and for people to understand and to see that mirror, right? Like, oh, I identify with that, like having challenges with something that feels like so-called imposter syndrome. So there's a lot of nuance that cannot be explained away in a single post, right? Or just like a 5-minute blurb on what the workshop is about, or even like in this podcast episode in a 1-hour discussion, which is why I have this 3-hour live workshop for us to dive deeper into the nuance of imposter syndrome, but also the expanded aspects connected to it. So the intuitive, the spiritual, and the collective field. So that's where we're gonna go in this live workshop on Thursday. If that resonates with you, if that piques your curiosity, I invite you to step in, grab your spot. We don't have a ton of space because of the capacities of my Zoom. So I encourage you to get your ticket sooner rather than later. And it's only $27. I kept it really accessible because I just want to make sure that anybody who is feeling this, because believe me, as you're going to see, I journeyed with this, experiencing this phenomenon for a very long time in different stages of my life. And it would have been really helpful. It would have been really helpful to have this kind of workshop and discussion, at least awareness and discussion around this years ago, like decades ago. That would have saved me a lot of grief. So that's what I want to do for you. Go ahead and go over to wildlyrooted.com/imposter syndrome. There are the links in the show notes. You could go click and come join us. And don't worry if you can't make it live, although I would absolutely love if you can make it live. There's going to be a lot of synergy. There's going to be a lot going on that would benefit you if you could make it live. However, if you can't, but you're still feeling really called, there is going to be a replay that you will get access to. So go over, sign up, and just make sure that you have your seat so that you can have the replay as well. Okay, so now that I've sort of put out that disclaimer, I wanted to touch on some of my personal experiences with this to really more as like an expose, right? To give a case study, so to speak, of what this could look like. Of course, when we look at, from here on out, I am going to be using the term imposter syndrome as a signifier for this greater phenomenon. But again, it's much more complex than that. But for the purpose of simplicity and recognition, I'm just going to continue to use this term imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome can come up and be expressed in a multitude of ways within one's life. And it really depends on your genetic profile, as we will see. I'm going to go deeper into that, but also what you were born into and with, and the context of your life, the context of your ancestry and your origins, karmic fields. So there's a lot there. And I encourage you to take with you what resonates in my personal storytelling and this medicine story as a case study, and leave what doesn't resonate with you. Leave the rest, because it may not actually pertain to you, but it could be helpful for somebody else. So as I was alluding to, imposter syndrome is really, we could see it as a shade. I don't like to use the pathology term of symptom, but that again can be helpful as an analogy. But we'll utilize shade. It's a shade of a larger palette of shadows or deeper challenges that we journey with, that we are meant to evolve or transform. And imposter syndrome is really a culmination of various things. In a recent Instagram post, I talked a little bit about this, but of course, like Instagram and these posts, and I think it's like 2,200 characters, not even, words, but it's like characters that you have this limitation. So very limited in terms of being able to go deep into the nuance of a topic like this. But I shared how imposter syndrome is really a culmination of a lot of different things, which may include childhood trauma, inherited fear and shame, lifetime, so your past lives, as well as the lives of your ancestors and the collective, of suppression and oppression, bloodlines drained of power, generations of living in a toxic culture of dominance, and forces outside of yourself that intend to keep you down. So there is a matrix of lots of different influences and forces that are at play connected into this manifestation of imposter syndrome. There is also the individual's journey, their karmic journey, their spiritual journey, based off of their unique gifts and shadows. We have the individuated experience of this, but we also are experiencing collective patterns connected to imposter syndrome as well that manifest through our individual lives. We are all on an evolutionary journey, and we are all interconnected. As within, so without, as above, so below. The cosmos and the cosmic patterns are found within us, within our DNA, within our bodies. There's also the collective experience reflected within the individual experience. There are these fractal patterns and reflections of the whole through the individuated experience. So I want us to really hear this, because a lot of times with imposter syndrome, it feels like a me problem, right? Like that's part of the point of imposter syndrome, is that you feel like a fraud, or you feel like you're not enough of XYZ. And so it feels very lonely. It feels very self-focused. However, it is a thread that is part of a greater web of this fractal pattern, of this more cosmic and collective experience. But it's manifesting in a unique way through you. I think that is an empowering thing to understand, because we can feel like it's all our fault. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? But if we know that we were born quite literally with these patterns in order to evolve them and evolve with them, to transform those shadows, then we can reframe our relationship with this. So when it starts to come up and be expressed, we can be like, aha, there you are again. What is this about? What is this connected to? And how can I lean into this rather than go into maybe victim mode or fear mode and succumbing to these voices that tell us to stop, to be smaller, to hide, or that we have to be more, do more, etc. In my personal experience, I have found that imposter syndrome really came through and expressed itself throughout my life in a lot of different ways, depending on the context and my age, right, and what it had to do with. So there was a woven thread of this that I really had to unravel at different points of my journey throughout my life. And I'm not saying that I'm completely over it, but there definitely there's an evolved version of what I'm working with. And now I am working with it as an aid in my understanding of myself and of others and of the collective field and of healing, rather than it being something that stops me or prevents me from moving forward or fully expressing myself in my life. So how did it show up in my personal life? Well, it definitely started as a kid. I had experiences as a kid that I even remember to this day very specifically, of the not enoughness. And I think that this is very common, right? And kids can be pretty harsh and truthful, and sometimes not truthful, but like hard on other kids. So we can have these experiences where there's compare and despair. There's feeling like you don't fit in, or you're not in with the crowd or particular clique. So it could be very tribal in that sense at a young age, and to come into yourself, as you begin to grow into yourself and as an individual, moving away from the mama baby dyad, this more supraconscious being that babies are, and coming into your body, coming into an individuated experience that's more aware and conscious, we can start to feel these things. So I definitely began to feel that, especially as when I was younger. I think there was a lot placed on me. I was the firstborn grandchild on one side of my family. I was the firstborn of my nuclear family, so I'm the oldest child. And there is a lot of pressure that can come with that, as well as a lot of attention. And those two together don't necessarily make for a good formula. So as a kid, I definitely felt a lot of pressure to be good, to be the good girl, to be perfect. So there is that element of perfectionism that was already there, embedded in there. I began to develop these tendencies that I actually forgot about, but then became aware of when I started in my own spiritual awakening journey, when back in my early 20s. I had lost memory of this, but when I was little, I had sort of these obsessive compulsive tendencies. And one of them had to do with my appearance and the way that my hair was. My bangs had to be perfectly laid out in an exact way. And I would get so anxious if they weren't. I would spend so much time trying to perfect them that it would bleed into other things. And it just was something that you didn't need to worry about as a kid, or ever. But it really was an obsession. And my anxiety around it was around what other people would think of me, what it means if I didn't have this perfect aesthetic appearance. Now, this compulsive or obsessive, these tendencies also applied to other things in my life. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I remember very vividly now this moment when I became so anxious and frustrated by really being sort of a slave or imprisoned by these thoughts and this compulsion, that I made a decision in that moment that every time that impulse or that thought would come through of needing to make it perfect, that I would immediately shift it. And so I began, and this was, I was very young. I was definitely in grade school. I'm not remembering the exact age, but I remember having to do that for myself and do mindset work, rigorous mindset work and awareness around this, until eventually I was able to soften it and ultimately break free from that obsession. And doing that, having that experience of no longer being tied to this obsession, but also the anxiety around not being quote unquote perfect in that particular way, was quite liberating. And then, of course, those memories went into a repressed place because I didn't remember them until later. But that is how I came out of it. Ultimately, it was really just I made a decision and I tended to it, and I was very committed to working with it. So that, I think, when I look back, that was the first consciously aware expression of this flavor of imposter syndrome, where there needed to be perfection, which is interesting because this perfectionism, or this judgment, having a lot of self-judgment, expressed itself in different ways in different parts of my life. So while it no longer had to do with, the way that my bangs fell on my face, it showed up in different ways. So coming into young adulthood, it began to bleed into my communication and the way that I interrelated with other people and what I thought others perceived me as. So I, as a young person, so this was probably, grade school coming into high school and even bleeding into college a little bit, there was this part of me that always had to either be right or look as though I knew, like I already knew something, pretending to know. And how this manifested was sharing little white lies. So meaningless little lies that didn't really matter, but ultimately served to provide a front to make me look like I knew something when I didn't. And this having to do with things that didn't actually matter. Of course, with this, there was always the, self-judgment around, oh man, like I should know this thing and I don't. What does that mean about me? What do I make that mean about me? And there was also that feeling of I will be exposed. What if I'm exposed and they find out that I don't actually know, I don't know what I'm talking about? Now, it's funny because it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because there's this behavior is fueled by so-called imposter syndrome, but then I do become a bit of an imposter because I'm telling these little white lies and pretending that I know things when I don't actually know. And so it served as evidence. It served as evidence that I was a bit of an imposter, which fueled even more this need to be seen as, somebody who did know. And then ultimately pushing me to actually do research or to learn and to do more so that I felt like I did know and turn those little white lies into truths, which I guess you could say is like the plus side of it. But that's another area of expression of how this came through in my early life. I was a performer when I was younger for many, many years, a dancer, an actor, and I had auditioned and got into a TV show, a dance contest called Sueños de Fama. Oh my gosh. I hope nobody finds this video. But anyway, I had a dance partner and we auditioned and we got a spot on this TV show called a dance contest called Sueños de Fama, which is Dreams of Fame. And I remember thinking I couldn't understand how I actually got there. Like, why was I even there? I was convinced that I would be uncovered as a fraud on television to the public, to the world, that they would see that I am not a good dancer. I was going to fail. Like, oh my God, how could they have her on this dance contest? Well, we won the first contest. And then when you win, you go on to the second round. And that just amplified rather than being evidence for, oh no, you actually deserve to be here. It's legit. It actually made it even worse because I was like, oh my God, now they're really going to find out that I'm not that great. I don't know what I'm doing. Right? So I remember having these fears and anxiety, yet doing it anyway. And I think that's an interesting thing about imposter syndrome and people who are either experienced or who have achieved certain things in their lives and still feel that imposter syndrome. It's not usually that it stops them from moving forward, but it's like this chronic anxiety that comes along on the ride with them. That can, yes, make someone procrastinate, which is very common when it comes to imposter syndrome, procrastinate or say no to invitations or not move forward on certain things. But what I have found is a lot of people push through and do the thing, but they're just feeling a lot of anxiety or these thoughts that are overtaking them during this process, which is really draining, incredibly draining, because so much of your energy, your mental energy, your emotional energy is going to these thoughts and beliefs that aren't actually true. When I got into university, into college, I went to University of Chicago, which is a really wonderful school. And I attributed the fact that I attributed my acceptance into this school to the fact that, oh, well, I'm Latina, and so they just needed another number. I don't actually deserve to be here. So yeah, all of my accolades and accomplishments and all the things that I've done and my great grades, et cetera, right? Like none of that mattered. I was there because I was a number that they needed to demonstrate that they are diversifying, right? Their student demographic. In class at school, I never spoke up. I never really participated for the first couple of years. So much so that I remember a professor, I went in during her office hours and she told me to speak more. She was this super feminist professor, and she was so bothered that it was mostly the guys that would speak up and a lot of the girls would hold back. And I remember her just expressing her discontent about this, but especially for me, and really wanting me to speak and to engage and participate. And I remember being in her office feeling shame because I quite literally felt paralyzed in the classroom. Like I could not speak up, even though I had these thoughts and I had things to say. It was like my throat chakra was completely blocked. So that's one thing that I had journeyed with for a very long time, which again, that's a whole other thing to unravel. There's so much that pertains to a blocked throat chakra. And that's the whole reason why I created the Feed Your Wild Voice program several years ago. But it was my experience and my deeper understanding of what did I journey with a blocked throat chakra for so long, that I have all of these things come up around that, and that being very much connected to this experience of imposter syndrome. And quite literally from speaking my truth, because when I did speak a lot of the times in conversation, there was these little white lies dropped throughout the dialogue. So I kind of got over that. I started to participate a lot more and build more confidence in my later years. Then going into, as an adult, my work as a healer and seeing a whole next level version of imposter syndrome come through as a healer, as a practitioner and clinician. So I started off as a health coach and then got my master's in human nutrition, functional medicine. I became a certified nutrition specialist. So in order to do that, it's like over 1,000 hours of practicum, and you have to take this big exam. You have to have your master's, then getting my license as a licensed nutrition dietitian. I worked with some of the leading doctors in their field. I was a lead nutritionist for the Bredesen study. So for anybody who's familiar, Dr. Dale Bredesen, he wrote The End of Alzheimer's. So this study was around cognitive decline in Alzheimer's, and I was one of the lead nutritionists for this study. I worked for and even wrote for Deanna Minnick, who was a mentor of mine. She's incredible. If anybody knows Deanna Minnick and her work, she's an amazing intuitive healer and one of the OGs in the clinician space of bridging spirit with science. She's a brilliant mind. I highly, highly recommend you check her out. I also have a podcast episode with her, so I'll make sure to drop that link below. So anyway, I'm sharing all these things literally not to brag, but to demonstrate that, hey, I am a legit clinician, right? Like I did the work, I have this study. And even though I was definitely confident enough to move forward and to take leaps in certain areas in my career, but as a nutritionist, I was overworked. I overgave. I overcompensated for what I thought was a lack on my part. I undercharged for an incredibly long time. I had leaky boundaries, so I was constantly going into overtime in session. I was always open to negotiation on pricing. I scheduled sessions when it was most convenient for my clients and not me. I didn't stick to rules that I had set for myself. I wouldn't charge, for example, I wouldn't charge for cancellations, even though that was the policy. I mean, on and on and on. There was all these things that I continued to cross my own boundaries. And that was a more insidious expression of this imposter syndrome. So while I did have confidence in my work and I had confidence that I could actually help somebody, there was something there around the perfectionism piece and around they are going to not like me. They're going to find out that XYZ, like I'm a fraud in a different sense or capacity, not necessarily in my nutrition work, but I need to demonstrate, I need to show that I'm going to go the distance and do all the things and work overtime and give them way more information, which actually was more of a disservice for them than, keeping things pretty simple. I did all of these things because there was a lack. There was this pervasive, insidious thread of this imposter syndrome that was expressing itself in my work in that way. So I have worked with a ton of other clinicians, practitioners, and healers, and this practice, like what I just described, is so common. It's incredible, especially when it has to do with healership. And so many healers are heart-centered, not all healers, but and when I use the term healers, for anybody who is new, I really see healers as everybody's a healer, right? So if you are in healing arts, you are supporting others in their healing journey and their journey of self-healing. So we're not healing anyone. We're not doing anything to someone to heal. We are supporting them in their self-healing process, right? So that's just a little caveat when I use that term healer. But for those who are in the healing arts, if you are in the practice or the business of healing and being in service to others in this practice of healing, you probably have experienced some level, some degree of this kind of imposter syndrome, especially when it comes around pricing. And, that's like a whole other discussion. There's a lot of nuance with that one too. So I'm not going to go there today. But just hear me out today through my own personal experience. This is something that I see a ton of in other practitioners and people in general, but I also saw it and experienced it within my own life. Now, there's a tendency to justify it, right? It's easy for us to say, well, I'm wanting to make it more accessible. I want it for the people. That's why I got into this. I want to be supportive and help everybody. Unfortunately, we live in a complicated paradigm of toxic capitalism, right? So that's a whole other, again, discussion, but we live in a society, well, I can speak for myself and maybe the majority of the listeners. If you have a phone and you're listening to a podcast, you probably most likely are in the matrix of a capitalist society. Again, not everybody, but probably most people tuning in. And of course, it's impacting the world globally. So it makes it really hard to live in an experience where we can share purely through energetic exchange or do service for free. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible by any means. Everything's possible, and there are lots of creative ways to go about it. And I encourage people to explore that. I myself am trying to consistently push myself to explore all of that, the facets of that. For example, like gift economy and such. But currently, it just in the context of the world that we're living in, it's really challenging to do that. And so we have to set boundaries, and we have to make sure that we're supported and we are paid and we have proper energetic exchange for our service in this world. So the justification can get a little bit tricky. Anyway, I don't want to digress too much, but these are some of the ways that throughout my life I have found imposter syndrome proliferating and expressing. Maybe you hear some similarities in your own story and your experience. Maybe you don't, and maybe it's expressed completely differently for you, or maybe you haven't really. This isn't resonating, and in this case, maybe this podcast episode isn't necessarily for you. Maybe you could share it with others, who might resonate with it more. The thing that's interesting is when I started to lean into intuitive healing, and of course this was parallel to my own spiritual awakening and coming into my intuitive gifts. At the beginning, I had a lot of this that applied to my intuitive work. Like, who am I to call myself an intuitive? I always thought others were more intuitive than me. For example, my sister, she was very intuitive. She is still very intuitive, but I always thought she was the, quote, intuitive one, right, in the family. And I didn't think I could ever be a so-called intuitive reader like the people that I saw on TV. I loved watching psychic shows. So this is like back in the day in the 90s, right? I remember being a kid and watching, oh my gosh, I forgot his name, but he's a famous psychic who had his own TV show. There'd be like a crowd of people, and whether or not you believe that those people are imposters or they're real or not. But I was engaged with that. I thought it was fascinating. And this is like as a little kid, right? Loved watching psychic shows. By the way, pro tip, if you have always been really interested in that stuff, or you were magnetized to things like that, like psychics or spiritual shows, like for example, I was so fascinated with astrology, even though I had no idea what it really was, what it meant when I was a little kid. I remember we used to watch Walter Mercado, who is this famous Latino astrologer, and watching him he's super flamboyant, and he was just like so magnetic and incredible to watch. And I remember watching him with my grandmother on like prime time TV. I forgot which channel it was, but watching Walter Mercado, and it was like, yeah, it just felt so right. And this is like a little kid, right? So if you experience that, I would say more likely than not, you have intuitive gifts that are wanting to be awakened, or you're seeing a reflection of yourself in some way in these shows or these people. So explore that if you haven't yet. But that was my experience. So I loved these shows. I would watch them, but I never thought that I could be like those intuitives or those psychics. And I would also see psychics as sort of like my therapists, intuitives and psychics, in my adulthood. And again, I saw them as having some special gift that I didn't have. And if anybody knows my story, maybe you heard in my Akashic Records 101 episode where I talk about how I got into working with the Akashic Records, or how they found me and my story around that. But just a quick piece of that, spoiler alert, after my mom had died, I was seeing this one psychic intuitive, who was really supporting me with tarot readings, and I got a few Reiki sessions from them. And one day I decided, I'm going to do this Akashic record reading with them. And I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what that was. It just sounded pretty interesting, and I felt very magnetized to it. So I went for it. Well, they were giving me a reading, and everything that they were saying was resonating. It was like, oh my God, how does this person know this, right? And then at the end of the reading, they said, oh, and I'm getting that you're going to work with the Akashic Records, and you're going to know the Akashic Records like I know them. And in that moment, I immediately thought, oh, they say this to everybody. Like, this is something that they say to everybody, right? To make them feel good, to pump them up. And so that's literally what I thought until a week later, I got this invitation, like this, kismet, cosmically aligned invitation, of course, with my soon to become mentor for learning how to open the Akashic Records and work with the Akashic Records. So anyway, these threads, like even when it was in my face, I was still like, oh, that could not be. This is not me. And it took a while for me to fully step in and accept and own my own intuitive gifts. It became easier when there was a lot more, synchronicity happening around me and messages that I was receiving and confirmation. So through experience, so continuing to work with people and seeing how, oh yeah, there is evidence that is supporting my gifts or XYZ, whatever it is that I was doing that could confirm, I built up more confidence and understanding around my abilities and gifts as an intuitive healer. And so that voice of imposter syndrome really started to lessen. But it's very, very common for anybody who is an intuitive or empathic. You are experiencing not only the voices in your own head, but also the voices of the collective, of other people that you are tied to and connected with, in relationship with. Inherited voices and experiences. So there's a lot to navigate through when you're doing this work. And it's very, very common to have this. So don't feel bad if you do. I think it's everybody. I think it's part of the journey, really, because as I'm going to get into right now, it's one of those things that presents itself so that we can transform it, so that we can evolve it, right, into the highest expression of what is, like the gift that is within it. While for most of my life, I didn't let certain things stop me in big ways, like I created a career, I moved forward in my life, and I very often saw challenge, or like if a person challenged me, I saw that as an invitation to prove them wrong, right? It motivated me even more. But this imposter phenomenon quite quietly lingered throughout my life, and would sometimes surprise me when I became aware of it. It was kind of like, haha, here I am again, right? Like it came up in these moments where I was like, oh man, like what? That's what it was? I thought that I had gotten over this. And I remember just thinking throughout different parts of my life, like, what is wrong with me? Why do I keep having this? Well, it turns out what I've been experiencing my whole life was much more pervasive than I thought. And so many of you I know are also experiencing this. So that's a little bit of background of how it expressed in my life, and maybe you're hearing similar threads of how it expressed in yours. This is obviously my own personal experience. We can see imposter syndrome really coming out in a lot of different ways, which we're going to explore more deeply in the workshop. But I just wanted to share how it showed up for me. And I also want to share some of the super supportive resources that have helped me in not just overcoming, like quote, overcoming imposter syndrome, but understanding, leaning in and transforming these shadows that underlie this umbrella of imposter syndrome into gifts that now serve me and continue to do so. So you all know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I'm a huge fan of astrology and human design. So those are just so practical. I'm a very practical, pragmatic person. Like, yes, I am mostly like my mind, my being, my spirit likes to hang out in the ethers. Like it's very hard for me to be here on earth. However, I am a practical, pragmatic person. So I like to receive things and play with things, but then apply them, make them applicable in real life. Because isn't that the purpose, right? And that's why I love astrology and human design, because they're like if there were an instruction manual, they would be they're so helpful in understanding the what is and what's going on and timeline and all of that. But one of the resources that is my absolute favorite and has been so profound, and I don't talk about it that much because I'm still in it. Like, it's been years, but it is like a lifetime practice because it really is a contemplative practice. It's the art of contemplation with this resource, and that is the Gene Keys. So if anybody is familiar with the Gene Keys or you've worked with the Gene Keys, wink, wink to you because you know what I'm talking about. Highly recommend that you check out the Gene Keys. If you are not familiar, I'll make sure to have the resource links connected to the Gene Keys below in the show notes. But you could go to genekeys.com, and that's gene as in Gene, like your genetics, and keys, like the key to unlock. So genekeys.com. And I will have specific resources that I have found to be super helpful in understanding, because it's a whole other system. So Gene Keys, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about exactly what it is, because you could do that, your own homework around that. But the Gene Keys are like the next level once you've sort of engaged, and you don't have to start off with human design, but it is connected to human design in a way. And if you've started off with human design, then you'll have an easier time understanding Gene Keys, where human design is a bit more like this, manual, or it's very practical. It's kind of, there's an instructive element to it and really looking at one's design. The Gene Keys brings it to this deeper level of exploration, evolution on a spiritual plane. And I was introduced to Gene Keys. I don't even remember when. It's been many years. And with the human design, when I was first introduced to it, I was like, this is like, I can't even go here, right? Because it's just too much. So if you are in that experience when you check out Gene Keys, that's totally cool. Like, plant the seed and then come back to it, because it's not meant to be understood, I don't know, even ever, but especially right away. So I've sat with it, worked with it for some time. And really the piece that I love about it is that it's slow, It's not meant to be like, fast, I'm going to change something and I understand it and boom, it's done. It incorporates the art of contemplation. So really sitting with something, meditating, praying on it, being with it, engaging with it on your day-to-day life, so that you have this deeper understanding and experience of transformation inside out. It's based on what is called your hologenic profile. So your DNA and what is carried in through your DNA from previous lifetimes, from the cosmic profiling. So, how the constellation of the planets was when you were conceived and born, the ancestral lineage, right? So all these things that I was talking about before, all of these are informing your hologenic profile. And of course, karmically, like what's in place karmically for you in this particular lifetime to transform and to evolve, and the collective field, because we are a fractal individuated experience that is part of this larger whole. So the Gene Keys is awesome. And founded by Richard Rudd, who I hope to have on the podcast someday. I'm working on it. He wrote a book on the various Gene Keys. There's 64 Gene Keys, and you can get your hologenic profile just like you would with your human design. You get your human design profile. You could get your hologenic profile through the Gene Keys website, utilizing your birth information, just like you would with an astrology chart. And when you get your chart, they have a lot of really helpful instructions on how to read your profile, articles on, the story behind the profile, behind the Gene Keys and all of that to understand. So it's a whole different world that you could dive into if you haven't already. Understanding, like coming into a deeper understanding of my own personal hologenic profile has been probably one of the most profound resources in helping me to evolve the shadow aspects that I am carrying, especially connected to what we might call imposter syndrome. So I want to share just a little piece of that that might be helpful just to hear on a personal note how I have worked with it and look at it just in one very small aspect, because there's this whole profile, right? So there's a lot of different aspects and places to look at. You have 11 spheres in your hologenic profile, and one of the spheres is your purpose. It's connected to your purpose. And this is one of your hidden gifts. So your purpose lies within your DNA. And when you build trust and alignment and you follow your dreams, you have that courage to continue to move toward them, then your purpose begins to be revealed, right? Like it starts to come forward. And purpose isn't necessarily having to do with one particular line of work. Purpose is really like a way of being. It's this gift within your being of why you are here. And so when you connect to the gift, there's different levels for each of your spheres or these areas of your life. So for example, with purpose, there's also one for life's work. There are 3 different levels. There's the shadow aspect of it. So this is, the shadow is what I'm talking about, like what we've inherited karmically, what we came here to evolve, what is also in the collective field that we are here in support of transforming. But there's also the gift that is revealed through the transformation of that shadow. So there's the gift side of that. And then there's what they call the siddhi. And the siddhi is really a frequency. The word siddhi is from Sanskrit, meaning divine gift. So the siddhic state really only comes when all of the aspects and elements of the shadow has been transformed, especially on the collective level. It's been transformed into light. So this is an alchemical transformational process, and it really is more of a collective process. It's not necessarily super common for a lot of people to reach the siddhic state of their particular gene key. And we're not necessarily meant to, like that's the path that we're moving toward, right? Like the path of evolution and more on a collective level. So that's why it's so important to work with these shadows and work with our gifts for ultimately the collective evolutionary process. But of course, our own evolutionary process through this individuated experience. Again, there's the shadow, there's the gift, and there's the siddhi. And siddhi is Siddhi. In looking at my profile, I thought that it would be helpful to look at the purpose sphere of my hologenic profile and share a little bit about that and how has been connected to the imposter syndrome that I've experienced in my life. And really because part of my purpose here is part of my life's work. Like the work that I'm doing and coming into intuitive healership is part of my purpose here. So there are, again, 64 different gene keys, and my particular gene key and profile for the purpose sphere, an area of my life, is the 18th gene key. And it's on my 5th line. So if anybody's familiar with human design, there's 6 lines, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's the 5th line. So if you look at your human design profile, you have a 2 number, looks like a fraction, and that's your profile. So I'm a 3-5. I've shared this previously. So I have a 3 line and a 5 line. Well, in the hologenic profile, depending on which sphere, like which area of your life you're looking at, you might have different lines that are connected to those 6 lines. And I have the 5 line. So in this particular area, that 5th line is connected to voice. Interesting, right? Because a lot of what I've been talking about already in my past experience was having to do with voice, with the integrity of the voice, the pretending, like telling the white lies, pretending that I know something when I don't, or not speaking up. A lot of the healing I needed to do around my throat chakra and my voice. The whole reason why I created Future Wild Voice, the program. So it's on my 5th line, but the actual gene key number is 18. And the shadow, the 18th gene key shadow, remember there's the shadow, the gift, and the city. The shadow is judgment. The gift is integrity. And the city is perfection. The 18th shadow is all about needing to be right. Oh, does this sound familiar? So I obviously journeyed with this for a very long time, this need to be right in a lot of different ways, and kind of struggling with that for a really long time. And the 18th shadow of judgment, this is all about judgment, governs the integrity of the mental body, of the mind. And the repressive side of the 18th shadow is about feeling inferiority. This pattern and this experience of judgment, this shadow of judgment, of course, is experienced firstly in childhood and especially in teen years. And depending on how your experience was with your family dynamic, or your caretakers, your parents, that will also help to inform how this shadow is expressed, right, in your life, and how harshly maybe it is expressed. But ultimately, there is this thread of judgment, and quite often, or probably in all cases, I would say, the origin of that is self-judgment, right? So out of your own self-judgment, it expresses itself in different ways in your life. So for example, you can become a conformist. So one of the things that I struggled with was I was a conformist in that I didn't speak up. I was a people pleaser. I just went along with the crowd. I went along with what everybody else wanted to do because I wanted to please them. What I didn't realize was that there was this level of self-judgment that was happening that I wasn't fully aware of, that was this thread throughout. So what happens with this? Well, self-judgment obviously it can proliferate in a lot of different ways. I gave a few examples of how it did in my own life. There was almost like a subconscious level of inferiority that was happening for me. And so there's this constant habit of undermining myself, pushing away or deflecting compliments, things like that. Now, when we move into the gift of the 18th gene key, which is integrity. So we're moving from judgment to integrity. Integrity is more than just, like being integrity with your own values, which of course is part of that. But integrity has to do with the structure and the strength of your foundation, your core. It's, especially within the gene keys, it's considered a deeply physical attribute. And it's actually part of your immune system, the functioning of your immune system and maintaining strength within your body. But ultimately, it really is about the integrity of the structure of you, the material you, and the integrity of your being, your way of being. So the gift of the 18th gene key is not to use or take judgment personally, because judgment is always going to be there. It's not like judgment is going to go away. I don't think that there's anything actually wrong with judgment itself, but it has to be rooted and heart-centered. It has to be rooted from a good place, right? So judging from the heart. And judging from the heart is you're just making an assessment, right? It's never cruel. It's really in service to truth and the collective and compassion and love when you're judging from the heart. And that's where the integrity comes in. So it's this transformation of like the shadow side of judgment into being an integrity with it and with yourself and with others. So no more white lies. There's no need for it. There's no more need for white lies or for hiding, because you are so deep in your own integrity and your foundation, the strength of your structure, and connected to your heart. And it's interesting that the Siddhic state is perfection, so moving from integrity to perfection. And of course, I am by no means there. And in the gene keys, it's interesting because they talk about how perfection is really, it's an ending. Because once you've reached perfection, Like, what more is there? It's an ending. And so then there is no more life, really. But it serves as this evolutionary pull for us as a collective to move toward and to always bring in this alignment, really, with the integrity and alignment in one's own heart. So when I connect this to my purpose, when I've done this contemplation work, and I still continue to do it, right? Like, it's a lifelong practice. But in my personal experience and story in connecting to the 18th gene key and my fifth line with my voice, with purpose, it's connecting to the heart, being in total integrity, and creating a strong foundation in the utilization of my voice to bring truth as much as I am connected to truth, or can identify my own truth, to express it with integrity in my own voice, and to bring a voice to this as well, which is kind of meta, right? Because I'm speaking to you through a podcast episode utilizing my voice and this podcast, which again is part of my work. It's really this project, this podcast, the Feed Your Wild podcast, is absolutely a part of my greater purpose in this world, is connecting with you through my voice and connecting to your energy, this collective field that we create when we're tuning in and tapping in this very quite intimate way, right? And me sharing aspects of my own life. But I hope that in my sharing of these aspects of my life, it's not to center myself, but it really is to utilize myself as a case study so that you may witness a reflection of yourself within my story, or something awakens within you simply by listening, even if it's not fully conscious or you haven't recognized it just yet. Well, there you have it, the gene keys, and how I utilized that resource in just one very small way of realizing my own journey and understanding it through the area of my purpose, and how it has woven itself in my life and connected to imposter syndrome, right? So like all these different ways, and that imposter syndrome being part of the judgment that I am here to transform, that shadow aspect that I am here to evolve and transform, not just for myself, but for the collective as well, which I think is very interesting that I'm also hosting this workshop. And I didn't actually choose that topic from this work or understanding. I chose that topic because that's what so many people were coming to me with and telling me that they were experiencing, and they wanted to overcome it or work through it. And I just saw this pattern and needing to bring this conversation and the deeper nuance of this conversation and connection to imposter syndrome to the greater collective, or those that are willing to step in and tune in. Some of the other resources that have been really helpful, again, I mentioned astrology and human design, but if you're just beginning to explore, or you have been looking at your Chiron, so Chiron as the wounded healer, I've talked a lot about Chiron over many different episodes over the years, but really looking at Chiron, this sacred wound that, the ultimate original wound of separation from the whole, we could say. There's all these different fractal patterns coming from that origin wound, the sacred wound, and Chiron being the wounded healer, showing us where we not only hold the wounded aspects of ourselves as it relates to healing and healership, but also the gifts. So that's what I love about Chiron, is really looking at that. I've talked about Chiron in my own journey, especially within the program Feed Your Wild Voice. For me, Chiron being in Gemini, having a lot to do with communication and the mind and in relationship. So again, lots there to look at. So if you're looking to glean a deeper understanding of imposter syndrome through your astrological chart, that could be one area. I'm sure an astrologer could also tell you a ton of other ways that you can unearth this within your chart. But I know that Chiron can be a wonderful starting point to do that. So working with it, just getting more curious about that within your own chart and your life. And also looking through your human design, what some of the challenges that you might experience based off of your design if you're operating in the quote, not self version of you, which is really the shadow version of yourself that needs to be evolved and transformed into your truth and your gift. I hope that this exploration in this case study has been helpful in some ways, and even just kind of seeing a glimpse of yourself or ways that you can begin to explore this in your own life and process. I would love to hear from you, your ahas, feedback, takeaways, like all across the spectrum. If it didn't resonate, if you wanted to hear something else, but also like what did resonate and your experiences. I'd love to know. You can reach out to me over on Instagram. I'm at Wildly Rooted. You can also email me, hello@wildlyrooted.com. And I would love to connect with you live on Zoom, our live workshop this Thursday, March 16th, free to be all of me, a practitioner and healer's guide to overcoming imposter syndrome and reclaiming your intuitive gifts. We'll be covering a lot more, specifically focusing on imposter syndrome, how it's showing up in your life, the surprising ways that it shows up for practitioners and healers specifically, physical symptoms that can be connected that are overlooked, the connection between imposter syndrome and intuition that no one is talking about, and ultimately how to not only break through this so-called imposter syndrome or transform it, as we could say after this conversation, but really begin to reclaim all parts of yourself, especially your intuitive gifts. I can't wait to see you over there. And if it's not a fit and it doesn't resonate, or it's just a no for now, that's okay too. I hope that you received value from today's episode, and looking forward to covering our next moon musing in our following episode, which will also be a special Healers on the Mend episode with our lovely co-host Megan Lehman, covering the new moon. All right, my loves, until then, be well.